Hi class. For our discussion this week, I want to talk about coverture. Coverture is the defining legal theory as to how married women were dealt with by the law. And American law is based on English common law. And English common law is, as it sounds, law that is common to everyone. It had replaced this idea of monarchical law and the privilege of monarchy, and said that law applies to everybody fairly equally. And so William Blackstone, who wrote Commentaries on the Laws of England that you see here in the background, William Blackstone defines in 1765 in this book what coverture is. And to a certain extent, coverture still exists today. So I'll just kind of explain it to you and then give you an example of how it still works. So by marriage, man and wife were one person. And during that marriage, then, a woman had no longer had a legal existence. She was a femme couvert, or a covered female. She was under the protection and influence of her husband, and so she did not have an independent legal identity. What that meant for women is that they could not hold property. A woman could not go into a covenant or an agreement with somebody because she did not exist. How can you make a pact with somebody who doesn't exist? She could, let's say she was raped. She could not bring suit against that person. She does not legally exist. Her husband has to. Her husband, therefore, was bound to provide her with some necessaries. If she got into debt, he had to pay for them. But he could also restrict her, correct her, in other words. In fact, you can see down here, the husband also, by the old law, might give his wife moderate correction. In other words, he could beat her. And it was legal to do so. In fact, the laws regarding domestic violence don't start to change till the end of the 1900s. So the idea that in the 1700s and 1800s coverture is well and alive is not surprising. Basically, this meant that the woman had very little ability to act independently. She couldn't, of course, be involved in politics because she didn't exist. And it is a reason why some women will choose not to marry, because as a single woman, they can still own property. It's not until the end of the 1800s that we start to see, for instance, married women's property laws. We'll see that in this course, where married women are finally able to own property. This week you are reading about Dower's thirds, and I don't think that's the way they said it, but you'll start to read about these ideas of how a woman could retain some money. And the woman, even though she was entitled by law, in the witchcraft articles where you read about Dower's thirds, devil in the shape of a woman, even though a woman is entitled to a third of the estate, you'll notice that in Devil in the Shape of the Woman, she was not allowed to, she didn't have control over that. The children, usually the oldest son, would have control over it. So she might have the right to use the house, but she couldn't actually have the house. Women couldn't have property, and that doesn't change till the end of the 1800s. Women didn't have the right to their own earnings. If a woman worked for wages, she had to hand those over to her husband. So coverture covered women completely. You ask, maybe you're saying, wait, didn't she say it still exists today? How is that so? Well, let's think about the court system and the Fifth Amendment. So the Fifth Amendment says that you do not have to incriminate yourself. Yet you probably have watched TV where you heard a woman saying that she pled the Fifth when it is her husband on trial. Well, how can she plead the Fifth when it's not she that is incriminating herself? And that is a vestige left over from coverture. Man and woman are one in law. Therefore, if a man was to incriminate himself, the woman would be incriminating herself also because she didn't have a legal existence of her own. So we still use it somewhat today. So have a great day.